Okay, thank you very much for the introduction and the colorful words that you've given to me. I know this is normally the session that, standing between guys and their lunch. So I'll try and keep it moving, and it won't take very long. So by way of introduction, I'll say a bit about the organization that I represent here today, because I think it's important we just get to know a bit of the background, just so that we appreciate what's happening with HPE. And then we'll talk a bit about a particular segment that's to do with cloud and networking, which may be new to some of us, but to us as HPE, this is something that is near and dear to us, and we're investing quite a bit in that. Okay, I can see my notes here, but it's not up on the screen. But anyway, I think we'll begin. So basically, like has been said, my name is George Odula. I'm currently the country manager for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Now, Hewlett Packard Enterprise may be a surprise to most of you, that it's a company that is just about 7 years old now. Fairly new, we would say fresh legs in the pitch, so we are ready for action. Now, Hewlett Packard Enterprise has a history behind it in terms of how we became. So most of us are familiar with HP, or Hewlett Packard, which has been a company that is about 75 plus years old. And in 2015, I believe in 2015, is when they made a decision that this company was too big, too large, and they decided that in order to make it more agile and have more focus on what we do, they would split it into two companies. So Hewlett Packard Enterprise became a spin-off from the bigger HP. That's why I'm saying it's only 7 years old. Hewlett Packard Enterprise deals with what we call enterprise equipment, mostly computing and storage, because we are an infrastructure company, and we've perfected that area of things, and we'll continue doing that, innovating around infrastructure and helping people to have a domain for their data, for their equipment, and what they do as far as IT is concerned. That's just one part of it. The other things that we do are around networking, and I'll be talking a bit about that. In fact, that's my focus for today's presentation, because I've also realized that most of us may not be very familiar with what we do on the networking side. I would call it the worst kept secret that we have as Hewlett Packard Enterprise, the networking bit. And we will talk about cloud around the networking space so that we can be able to appreciate what's happening there. Now, the other big change that we did as Hewlett Packard Enterprise, which started in 2015, is that 3 years ago, in some areas across the world, HPE, as we know it, decided to sort of give operationalization to some companies. And therefore, you will see that our name is Hewlett Packard Enterprise operated by Selectium. That's our legal name on the ground. So whenever you hear Selectium, or if you call us Selectium, we will respond. If you call HPE Selectium, we will respond. If you call Selectium HPE, it's the same organization that you're talking to. So just for us to know that this is the Hewlett Packard Enterprise that we are dealing with today. It's called HPE, operated by Selectium. It can also be called Selectium. It can be called HPE. It's all one and the same thing. Our solution focus today, and quite a bit of it has been talked about here, is really enabling the next wave of digital transformation, which is fueled by apps and data, which is everywhere. And even in the previous panel that we had here, the people in that panel talked a lot about data being, I think, the new gold today for us. So we are big on that. We are big on data because what we do is data-driven. We are big on the edge, and we are coming up with edge-centric solutions to be able to address things on the edge. So when you talk about how do you connect to the cloud and things like that, we are enabling that. And then, of course, the last thing is being at the core of the cloud and enabling the cloud. That is another thing that we do in a big way. And in one of the panel sessions later on, one of my colleagues will be talking about a new concept that we've come up with, which is called the Green Lake program. And Green Lake is really about how do you consume the cloud, how do you leverage the services across the cloud, and we'll be talking about that later on. Okay, sorry, for some reason it's not aligned, but it's okay. So what is Aruba? Like I said, this is one of our solutions that we have, and this mainly focuses on the networking side of the business. And so we have got something called Aruba Central, and Aruba Central's, the main thing around Aruba Central is to automate the network. Basically, unifying management of the network so that you are able to connect all the building components, all the physical devices around the network, and be able to also just leverage that to make the network easy to orchestrate and to run and to work with. So that is what Aruba Central is all about. And I'll talk a bit about how the modern network has come to be. So we have something called, we talked about digital transformation, and most businesses today are actually moving to a place whereby they are modernizing their business operations. And one of the key things, of course, in modernizing business operations is around networking. So we see that 15 billion devices, more than that, are expected to connect to the enterprise infrastructure by 2029. Yeah, that's on the enterprise infrastructure. So that is one of the things that is going to happen. Secondly, we see that for that to be able to take place, we need to have certain things in place. And we're talking about how to manage these IoT devices. So IoT is really about the Internet of Things. And there are so many things that are plugging into the network. We talked about 15 billion as a number that is expected to be in place very soon. But even today, as we speak, many times you ask people in IT, those who are managing IT at the front, if they are aware of the various devices which are plugged into their network. And from a Gartner report, it shows that about 80% of guys who run the network will admit that they do not have a clue about a good number of some of the devices. So you find all these things that we call the headless devices that are plugged in. You find that businesses many times have needs and they need to move quickly. So businesses plan what they need to do. They come to the IT guys, maybe calling in favors, or if there is no strong governance practice in place in the organization, you find that people are going to help out the business to quickly plug in devices within the networks. And so you find that there is all these devices across the network which are not accounted for. Of course, that leads to what? Vulnerability of the networks. A lot of threats that come in terms of how the network is managed. So how do we harness that? How do we take care of that? And I'll talk about that in a short while. The other thing is that statistics also show from Gartner that $305 billion are expected to be spent on the network in 2022, or rather up to $305 billion. So that tells you that there's an exponential increase in the spending on the network, and this is mostly on the public cloud. So $305 billion are expected to be spent on this. We talk about what COVID has done, and somebody alluded to that here, in terms of organizations moving to a sort of hybrid working space. That also brings its own challenges, even as far as businesses are trying to modernize their business operations. The hybrid workspace has its own challenges, and they say that about 70% of the people who are connected remotely are always or regularly having challenges within their network in terms of connecting and being able to connect to their business applications and the data that they have. So what you're saying is basically that the digital transformation has accelerated, and that is one of the features that will lead to the rise of the cloud network. Legacy networks are holding businesses back. So that's also something which we see as a common feature for us today. What do we mean by that? So basically we've come from a place whereby, if you look at the last maybe 10 years ago, even the last 5 years ago, what we have today as the network is very different from what was there in those years. So changes are coming in a very exponential way, and the moment you get caught up in managing or running legacy networks, you will not be able to make sure that you are taking advantage of the trends within the market and plugging in the way that you're supposed to. So these legacy networks will hold back businesses as they try to move their networks into a place whereby it's modern and it's able to take care of the trends within the market. I see my time is running out, so I'll quickly move on. So I was talking about modernizing our business as being one of the key features we are facing today, especially with what COVID has done, and we need to change the way we do our business. And then secondly, of course, there are impacts or negative impacts towards that. And one of them is the legacy networks holding back the internet growth. So what is the cloud networking concept that we talk about at HPE? Like I said, Aruba is what we use, or rather the brand name that takes care of our networks. So cloud networking has arisen in terms of making networking agile, secure, and automated, especially in the way it is managed. And many of us will attest to the fact that you may be able to buy a lot of new equipment to plug into your network, but it's a different thing to configure it, to set it up, to be able to manage it, and to run it in a way that makes sense to the business and also takes care of your return on the investments that we make. So Aruba Central is our tool that takes care of this. Aruba ESP architecture. ESP stands for Edge Services Platform. So what we have is an architecture that is made up of 4 parts. Okay, I wish you could see it all in one screen, but not a problem, because I'm going to start with the bottom. So the bottom layer that we talk about is what we call the unified infrastructure. So unified infrastructure is really about the physical devices that we've always had in the network and we are very familiar with. So that is what forms the basic layer. So you need to have that in place, because without it, you don't have the network. Then we move on to security. And as far as security is concerned, we talk of zero trust security. In other words, you need to have features inbuilt within the architecture that takes care of security within the network. So that is also very important. The next layer that we put on top of that is the AI Ops. And AI Ops is like bringing in the 6th sense to what you're running within the network. In other words, the AI Ops is what brings in intelligence to the network. So we have these features built into Aruba Central, such that it is very easy to expand or to grow your network without putting in too much effort. In many ways, you do not need to even go out physically to touch some of these points when you want to push configurations or even do upgrades or even firmware upgrades to the internet. Last but not least, all this is covered under what we call as a service. So as a service is basically how do we consume, or how do we even procure as an organization this cloud networking that we have. It comes to you and gives you the choice of having it procured as a service. So for the customer, you can either buy appliances that are able to push Aruba Central into your channels, or you can procure it as a service. And then again, it's part of the Green Lake program that I talked about, which will be talked about in a panel later on. So these 4 components that we've talked about are taken care of, and this is what constitutes the entire Aruba Central architecture. Unified infrastructure, zero trust security, AI Ops, and everything as a service. I'll skip the security part, but security here is basically emphasizing the need to have security, and I think that has been talked about so many times, that even as the network continues to grow, as people continue to invest in networking, what about security? Because all these things that you're plugging in need to find a way to be secured, because they open up a lot of threats and vulnerabilities across the network. Okay, so I think I'll conclude with this slide around the ROI of Aruba Central. And without getting into too much detail, first of all, of course, there is TCO savings around this. Like I said, in many cases, you do not need to go out or send somebody out every time to the various branches or wherever people are or wherever the devices are to set up the network, to configure it, to roll out updates and so on and so forth. So there is TCO savings around this. Of course, there is improved IT productivity in as far as there is unified management from a single pane of glass. And you can view the entire network, whether it's the WAN, the LAN, the SD1, or whatever it is. So long as you can be able to do that from a single pane of glass, there's going to be improvement in terms of people and human resource productivity. Again, we talked about it's an AI-driven scenario whereby there is a lot of AI built into this entire solution. And that, of course, means that you're able to detect any forms of threats to the network before they even happen and be able to take remedial measures without human intervention. So the thing self-heals and takes care of pushing out information to the people who are managing the network to be able to do the fixes that need to be done. I/O resiliency, I think in terms of high availability and managing threats and security compliance on the network, that also is covered. There is the issue of business agility. I think we've talked about that. Business agility is all about the cloud conversation that we are having. So you're able to provision things very easily, run whatever it is you want to run across the network in a very seamless way, because there are tools that are inbuilt within Aruba Central to take care of that. So there's business agility that comes in and cloud-like enhancements to your network. Technical support, we've talked about troubleshooting, which is automated. and integrated software support across the network. Last but not least, I talked about a flexible consumption model. In other words, you can be able to consume this as a service with what we call the Green Lake program that you're running. So sorry I've had to rush through that, but we've got a booth outside there in case you need to get a bit more detail and information around what Aruba Central is all about and how this fits into the modern cloud. Please feel free to engage with the rest of our team after this. And also we will be talking about Green Lake, which is a big thing for us because this is really the next way or the next opportunity or choice for an IT organization to be able to procure what they need in terms of ICT infrastructure. With that, thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand it over back to the moderator. Thank you.